Welcome everybody to this evening's Early Years Zoom with the National Education Union. My name is Daniel Kennedy and I am your National President. Firstly, I hope you are all safe and well and have had a good start to the new term. I am a teacher first and foremost, and I've had a privilege of teaching early years, and in fact when I was elected to this role as Senior Vice President, I was indeed a nursery years teacher. I know the immensely valuable work that you do and the amazing job that's done in the current climate of funding cuts and COVID chaos. So thank you for joining. We've got a number of speakers this evening who are all very, very welcome. But first and foremost, I'd like to introduce you to Sam Riddle, our BSL interpreter. A behaviour statement will get posted in the chat, but tonight we will be coming together to discuss the funding campaign for Maintain Nursery Schools, and we will also be hearing about an update on Baseline from Ken Jones, and then we will be discussing recognising uniqueness in early years. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers. Please put those in the Q&A function. After each speaker, we will take some questions and hopefully your questions will be answered. But that's enough from me. We will go straight to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Beatrice Merritt. Beatrice is the Chief Executive of Early Education and Secretariat of the APPG, that's the all-party parliamentary group for nursery schools, nursery and reception classes. Early Education is a partner organisation in the joint campaign to save our MNS, along with the NEU, NEHT and Unison. Beatrice will talk about the joint submission calling for a long-term funding settlement to maintain nursery schools ahead of the comprehensive spending review this autumn. So welcome, Beatrice. Please put any questions that you have for Beatrice in the Q&A, and once we've heard from Beatrice, we will do our best to answer those. So hello, Beatrice.
Thanks, Daniel, and good evening, everybody. You probably have the same sense that I do, that this is a little bit like Groundhog Day, because we've been going through this process of asking for a long-term settlement for nursery schools for the last 5 years since the introduction of the Early Years National Funding Formula. And we've had lots of warm words from ministers, but we haven't quite got the actual delivery of all their promises yet. So we are hoping that this year, the good news about this year's spending review is that it is a 3-year settlement. So some of the problems we had in previous years when there was a 1-year settlement and they're saying, oh, we can't make big changes for a 1-year settlement, they don't have that excuse now. But on the other hand, we know that budgets are very tight and everybody's clamouring for more money. So we have jointly, so that's ourselves, Early Education with the NEU and NEHT and Unison, put in a submission to the spending review. We have taken as a template the principles that Vicky Ford, as Minister, put forward for what the long-term solution for nursery schools funding needed to look like. All of which are very vague but unproblematic criteria in a way about fairness and sustainability and so on. But we've tried to translate that into what this would really mean. So it boils down to 6 things that we've identified. First, the Maintain Nursery School supplementary funding, which has been the stopgap measure for the last 5 years, has not increased in line with inflation. So if that were to be brought up to the same levels it was in 2016-17, it would need to be increased by 12%. Now, we're not saying we should keep the supplementary funding, but just in terms of a baseline amount of the funding, it's at the least, at very least, got to reverse that 12% cut, because the supplementary funding on average represents about a third of nursery schools funding. So it's really quite significant if that has been cut by 12%. Secondly, we've said that government needs to put in place a viable hourly funding rate reflecting actual costs of teaching in a nursery school on all the government funded entitlements. So not purely the universal 15 hours as at present, but also the 2-year-old funding and the 30 hours. We have said that another key principle needs to be parity with primary schools, which includes an annual lump sum payment, which would smooth out some of volatility from year to year and ensure those additional core costs of having a head teacher and a qualified Senko and all the other things that schools are required to have and PBIs aren't, needs to be covered. And that we're also asking for the level of the early years pupil premium to be increased in line with primary school funding. Children don't suddenly become more expensive when they move into reception. If anything, the cost of teaching in nursery is higher. And that's something we'd like to see across the board in early years, not just the nursery schools. We are also saying government needs to tackle the long-running issue of business rates. Some nursery schools get their business rates reimbursed, others don't. The supplementary funding covers it if it were, or covered the cost as it was at 2016, if local authorities submitted it in their returns in 2016-17, but it hasn't been uprated for all the business rate increases, and it's still a really inconsistent pattern. We did have some positive news when we responded to the recent business rates consultation from the DfE, putting a strong case for maintained nursery schools to be treated the same as other schools. And thanks to all of you who responded, we had a really good level of response from nursery schools and also from local authorities and others making the case for nursery schools to be treated the same as other schools. And government recognised that this was an important principle and undertook to look at it, but they confessed that they don't actually know how much nursery schools are paying in business rates at the moment. They don't have the data to cost it, and the current system doesn't provide for it. So we think that needs to be built in, again, parity for schools from the beginning. Finally, we've said there needs to be a consistent national basis, not that there shouldn't be cost of living differences between different parts of the country, but that at the moment there is no consistency at all. Areas in neighbouring very similar places are currently getting wildly different amounts of funding, and we've said that historical inequity needs to go. We need a consistent formula across the country. And finally, because we need to do all of that, there will almost certainly be a need for transitionary support. So some, the lowest funded schools will hopefully be brought up to a higher level, but it could be that some of the schools which are more generously funded at the moment, if you're trying to invent a formula that's fair to everybody, there are almost certainly winners and losers, so there would need to be transitionary support. So those are the principles. And we estimate that it would cost somewhere around £96.5 million to do all that, but obviously Treasury and DfE may have better figures than us to cost it. That's an estimate compared with the 59 million at the moment. So it would be an increase on the amount that we get from the supplementary funding, but it's not a massive increase and it's not huge in the scheme of things. We will see what government's response to that is. You can join us and support us. Again, ourselves, NEU, NAHT and Unison are organising a march, which hopefully you've all signed up to attend. 4:15 on the 19th of October to meet in Parliament Square, 4:30 to march to Downing Street, and then a select group will hand in the petition at 5 o'clock in Downing Street. So I'm sure that Jacinta will post the links again for signing up to join the march, for signing the letters to the Chancellor. So please do that and encourage other colleagues to do the same. The day before the march, we have an all-party parliamentary group meeting for the APPG for nursery schools, nursery and reception classes, which will again call for the funding needs to be addressed. That will be taking place as an online meeting, so hence it being the day before. Again, please attend. I'll post a link to that shortly. Please encourage your MPs to attend. That's, if you like, the most crucial bit, that we want MPs to show their support by just turning up, even if it's for 5 minutes, to turn up, have their say, show their support, and let the Chancellor know that this needs to be on his list. So I think that is hopefully a thorough update on all the current issues with the nursery school funding campaign. But I'm very happy to answer any questions, get feedback. We know you are all doing an amazing job, but facing huge issues with funding, with falling numbers, with all kinds of post-COVID challenges. And now is not the time to add funding crisis into that mix. So we will keep pushing strongly and hope that we will get a long-term funding solution finally for Maintain nursery schools.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. It's absolutely correct. We need a long-term settlement and solution for funding in Maintain nursery schools. It looks like we're in a bit of a fortunate position in the sense that there aren't any questions for you. So you must have answered all of people's queries and questions during what you had to say there, Beatrice. But thank you so much for that really important contribution. And as Beatrice said, please be at the demo in October. I'm hoping to be there. And we need to really build the momentum around the funding for Maintain nursery schools. We do have a question coming in, which it looks like is unrelated to you, Beatrice. So we shall move on to our next speaker. So thank you very much for that, and I shall find a place where that is appropriate to have that question answered. Our next speaker, giving an update on baseline and more than a score, is Ken Jones. Now, Ken is the lead policy specialist member for member empowerment, and has been working very much with the More Than a Score campaign. So welcome, Ken. Over to you, Ken.
Yes, okay, I hope you can hear me. It's yesterday, I was meeting with the DFE. We heard that 5,000 primary schools out of 16,000 or so have returned their baseline scores to the STA, the Standards and Testing Agency. So what's the verdict so far on this new statutory assessment introduced in schools in September, a year later than planned? We've been hearing some things from members. Those are confirmed in 2 articles published this week in Nursery World and the TES, based on interviews with teachers and EY leads in schools. It would be interesting to know whether these articles confirm the experience of people on this call. Staff have pointed to a number of problems to do with resources. The demands on staffing made by one-to-one testing, demands on space, requirements for cover. They've commented on intrusive drop-in checks by people from LAs, checking on the conduct of reception baseline assessment. They've commented on the impact of COVID-related absence, particularly staff absence. So there are a string of issues that are affecting the functioning of reception classes in this context, with the added element of baseline on top of the stresses of COVID and the usual demands of the start of term. But more fundamental points, I suppose, principled points, points about educational value are also raised. In the words of Helen Pinnington, the EY Foundation lead quoted in the TES, staff would much rather have the time to assess children in a natural scenario as they play in their class environment and to be building relationships, teaching routines, and reassuring children through the first few weeks of school. Or we have comments made by the head teacher, Coleman. These children have been through traumatic experiences in the last couple of years, and we think the first thing they should do when they start school is to be formally assessed in numeracy and literacy. Really? So I think there are considerable problems being identified, certainly the TES think there are, by school staff faced with the new demands of baseline, which they regard as organizationally a problem and educationally a problem too. What to do in these circumstances faced with statutory assessments? Well, carry on identifying all the problems associated with this initiative, which remains ridiculous and unstable. Baseline's been tried twice before, it's been dropped. The whole notion of unsettling a child in their first weeks of school in order to produce an accountability measure 7 years later makes very little educational sense, and that will become apparent, I think, with every week that passes in this round of baseline. Based on the experiences of children and school staff, we as a union are going to make that point again and again. We're making it alongside Modern School, which has had a consistent and very popular focus on baseline over the last 2 years. Last week, Modern School handed in a petition signed by 110,000 people against the introduction of baseline. And that was quite a media event covered by the press and by television. And there's plainly a lot of concern about the notion of subjecting 4-year-olds to testing at this time in their very limited educational career after everything that's gone on over the past 18 months. As a union, we're going to survey the experience of our reception class members in a survey that's going out on the 9th of October. We want to use this as the basis of messaging about the baseline experience. We're going to be doing that in the absence of any plans on the part of the DFE to look at the impact of baseline on schools. As far as they're concerned, it's a technical exercise. They're concerned about technical issues of validity and reliability. They're not concerned, if you like, with the kind of flesh and blood impact of baseline on children and on schools. We want to feed that experience into the Commission on Primary Assessment, which, as requested by our annual conference, we're beginning to organise this term, reporting next year. That will cover the whole range of statutory assessment in primary schools. We're not going to let this issue go. We think that our concerns as a union are grounded in the concerns of school staff, the concerns of parents, and the situation of children. That's an update then, and we'll be happy to come back with more during the course of the term.
Thank you very much, Ken, for that really important contribution on baseline testing. You're absolutely right. It's completely horrific. The thought of testing 4-year-olds immediately after this pandemic when they should be playing and building relationships. I'm just going to check if we have any questions for you. There is not one currently. So thank you very much for that. We all need to be collectively organising to oppose and scrap baseline and quite high stakes testing in primary schools generally. But thank you very much for that, Ken. Our next speaker is an early years practitioner, an NEU rep and assistant branch secretary in Oxfordshire, and she's also a member of the NEU's early years reference group. So welcome, Lucy Coleman.
Hi, hope everyone can hear me okay. I've just nipped out of my committee meeting to attend this one. So so as Daniel said, I'm on the early years reference group, and we meet sort of once a term. It's obviously we've been meeting via Zoom to discuss early years issues within the union. And at our most recent meeting, one of the main things that we talked about, in addition to obviously the nursery funding and the baseline, was about how we can increase membership and participation of early years members within our union. And part of the problem that we have with getting early years members into the union, we discovered that the membership categories and the membership fees don't always reflect what early years members job roles and also their salaries. So that's one of the things that I've been working on with Ken and with some people from the head office. So it's quite a tricky thing for us to get right. So we're taking our time over it. But what we really want to do is make sure that when early years members go onto the website, or potential early years members, that they see themselves in our union, that they see that their job role reflected in those membership categories. One of the issues that members said to us is that often, for example, early years teachers don't earn as much as a teacher in a primary school, and yet their membership fee would be the same. So we want to be able to reflect the fact that, yes, they are qualified early years teachers, but they don't earn the same amount as a primary school teacher. So therefore, we want to be able to offer them a reduced membership fee. Things like student membership for early years members, because they are trainees, a lot of them are doing apprenticeships. So we want to be able to set up a reduced fee or even a free membership for our trainee early years members. And like I said, we want to increase the participation of early years members, but that's not going to happen if they don't see themselves in the union. So that's one of the big things that we've been talking about in the early years reference group. And hopefully that issue is going some way to be resolved. And I suppose it's kind of like a chicken and an egg situation, because we want to fight for early years staff, early years practitioners, to be better paid. But to be able to win on things like better pay and better funding, we need more union members. And so, without getting the membership categories right and without getting more members into the NEU, it's going to be hard to win on better pay and better terms and conditions for early years work practitioners. I was a nursery nurse before I trained as a teacher, so I know how hard nursery nurses and nursery workers work, and I know how poorly they're paid, and I really want to fight to recognise those members.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I do have a question, actually, from Hamish, and I wondered if you were aware of this at all. I also have an answer for the person who's raised the question, but it's interesting to hear your experience, Lucy. Are you aware of school-based nurseries who've replaced their classroom teacher with a TA and justified keeping the 1:13 ratio by saying another teacher is overseeing the planning? According to the person who's asked the question, this is quite common in Camden.
Yes, I have heard of that happening in Oxfordshire as well. As a reception teacher, I would actually fight against that, because if you're a reception teacher and you're responsible for a reception class, then I don't think it's fair that you should also be responsible for a nursery class. I think our nursery children deserve the highest quality education like the rest of the school. And I also don't think it's fair on the nursery nurses or TAs who are being expected to do a teacher's job, but for a much lower salary and being given the additional responsibility. So I do know that that is an issue, and I think that we should be locally as districts, that we should be aware that that's happening, and we should be trying to fight that.
Absolutely agree with you as well, Lucy. It really is another example of funding cuts and how those are impacting on schools. So absolutely, we need to be resisting and raising the demands for fair funding for schools to maintain nurseries, and yeah, absolutely resisting. I taught in a nursery class in a primary school, and believe me, I think it requires a qualified teacher and a number of highly qualified support staff as well. So yeah, we should absolutely be resisting that. So to the colleague in Camden, please get in contact with your district secretary in regards to this, because it may be an opportunity for you to organise around and campaign around, because our children in early years, particularly after the past 2 years, they've had deserve access to a teacher, they deserve access to highly qualified staff, and they obviously deserve fully funded education. So it's a part of that broader fight as well. So I hope that's answered your question. We are waiting for another speaker to just sort of to come in, but it would be really interesting if you could perhaps put in the chat your experiences about baseline. Lucy, have you got any experiences of baseline this year?
Yes, I'm a reception teacher, so we've been doing reception baseline in my class, and it is a real slog. It's really hard pulling children out of their play to take them to a quiet space away from the classroom that they're still settling into. Fortunately, I'm in a mixed reception and year one class, so I only had 10 reception children to baseline, and that was enough. That took me a day and a half away from the rest of my class. And although the children enjoy having that one-on-one time, that's the benefit, the only benefit of it. The kind of questions that you're asking them are not particularly useful, and I've found out more from being with my children in the class. For example, a child who I baselined last week sort of did okay in the baseline assessment, and when I was in the classroom with him this week, and he has shown me that he can sound out his brother's name. He sounded it out and wrote it on a whiteboard independently, and then asked me to read it back to him. He was playing with some little coloured dogs and was making patterns with them and counting them and taking one away. This was all child initiated, and I learnt far more from those interactions with him than I did taking him away into a quiet space where he's not familiar and giving him some plastic bears. Absolutely.
I think that half an hour spent one-on-one would be better spent reading a story or interacting in that sort of way. And just for those who are not in reception, what sort of questions are you asking children? What sort of things are you assessing when you're doing the baseline?
So there's a math section, which is just, basic numeracy skills and asking them to recognize numbers. Interestingly, one of the questions asks them to recognize numbers between 10 and 20, which is interesting because the new EYFS curriculum, we're only supposed to teach them up to 10. So that's an interesting point. And then there's a sort of literacy and communication component. I do apologize, I'm in a hotel. There's pictures. There's some nice elements where there's pictures and you're saying something and asking them to point to it, or you point to something and they have to say what it is. But there's also a really tricky section where you tell the child a story, but there's no pictures. And then you have to ask them a question based on the story that they've just heard. And most children find that really hard because, they're not cued in to what you're saying to know what to listen out for. So they're actually creatively coming up with their own answers to what mum might have bought at the shop, you know, apples, oranges, you know, quite natural things that a 4-year-old would say, but the answer that they're looking for is something else. And yeah, so that tricks quite a lot of them out.
Oh, wow. Okay. So flawed, aren't they? Baseline assessments, pedagogically.
Completely flawed. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the idea that a child just learns, this goes on this linear direction of learning, and you can assess them in early years and in reception and map out where they'll come out in year 6 is utterly flawed, and in fact really is just going to be designed to keep teachers in check, isn't it? That's really
it is
it's more of that punitive accountability rubbish that doesn't benefit children at all. Anyway, Lucy, thank you so much for your contribution this evening. I can see lots of comments in the chat. Keep them coming. Keep your questions going in to the Q&A. But thank you very much to Lucy Coleman from Oxfordshire. Next speaker is Michaela Levner. And Michaela is an NEU rep and early years teacher at Chelwood Nursery School, which is maintained nursery school in Lewisham. Michaela will talk about the impact of funding cuts to their school and about how we need to mobilise for this very important march on Downing Street on the 19th of October. So welcome, Michaela.
Thanks so much, Daniel, and everybody, and massive apologies for arriving so extremely late. I've just got home from school, so apologies about that, and I might look a bit windswept because I am and a bit exhausted. So yeah, I'm sure already, I believe already you will have heard a bit more from Beatrice about the scenario that's facing us as maintained nursery schools due to the funding formula disaster. So I shan't say any more about that. As Daniel says, what I'm going to try and bring, my muddled head, what I'm going to try and bring to the meeting is a sense of really what we're battling for and what the situation we're finding ourselves in the remaining nursery schools, maintained nursery schools across the country. And I think, we've already had many meetings, actually, to be honest, and rallies, and we've done some quite amazing campaigning. I think the thing that always strikes me is how continuously passionate everybody is who works in maintained nursery schools, and yet how absolutely and determined, I should definitely say that, but how much we're all struggling. And I think it would be a lie to say that we're not. I think for the children that we provide our early education for, our commitment is such that I'm sure both the families and the children wouldn't probably be aware of just how much a struggle it is each day. Many nursery schools are already restructured and are already experiencing what it's like to work with the tightest staffing that you could possibly have. There really isn't, I would say, anything to shave off. There's no wriggle room. There's no luxury. You know, if somebody's unwell, there's nobody to cover them, and we're making do. People are doing additional hours, and it really is tough. What I would say is we've got this situation where we're called maintained nursery schools, but we're not really maintained. We have to income generate, as no other school would think you have to income generate if you're a state school, a part of the state school sector, yet not treated as part of the state school sector. And in terms of being part of the early years sector, we are more expensive. And I kind of believe, having experience now of those MPs that say they support us, the Tories that is, that actually I wonder if our model is what they really want. You know, we are more expensive. And the reason is because we have head teachers, we have qualified teachers. I'm a Senko in my school, which means I'm a qualified teacher, and you know, and have done the Senko course. I mean, these things make us more expensive, but the quality that we bring and the fact that we, you know, true to our hearts is to be as inclusive as we possibly can. To me, that it breaks my heart that the things that we hold so dearly, such as welcoming every child and every family, is truly at risk. So now in my school, where we could be flexible in terms of including children, giving them something additional at various points of the day, that really doesn't exist anymore. We don't have that to pull on, we just don't. So every time we have children joining us, I'm having to be working really hard to get additional funding from the local authority through that extraordinarily tough education and healthcare needs assessment process. So everything is a struggle, survival is a struggle. And you know, my own school is in huge deficit. That deficit doesn't come because we've been inefficient or reckless. That deficit comes from the fact that our actual funding is so inadequate that even with supplementary funding and the income generation that we can do, we just can't make ends meet. And when you get told, well, you've just got to use what you've got, and that's what you've got, you know, cut your purse, that's not the right saying, but you know what I'm trying to say. So if you do that, you're not going to be the schools that you're supposed to be and that we want to be. So in our own school, we are facing restructuring, and I can't tell you what it is right now. I can't tell you because I don't know yet, but I do know that we've had this guy from the Department of Education. I think the acronym is an SRMA. You know, basically what they do is they number crunch and say, this is your fund, this is your money, your budget, make do with what you've got. Well, why should we do that? You know, as I say, I don't know what's facing us next week, the week after, but I do know that it's going to be pretty drastic because there's nothing that can be cut now other than ourselves. A number of us, I imagine. So if I come back in a few months' time, my story will be worse. But what I want to say to people is we need to be able to put enough pressure on the Chancellor. And the Tories, we need to be able to make our voices heard. And which is why I think it's really important that we've got this opportunity on the 19th of October to go down to Downing Street and hand in an open letter. Now that open letter needs to be absolutely full of signatures. And so we need solidarity right across the union. We need solidarity from everybody in the early years, whether you're working in a maintained nursery school or not. We need to try and get every parent that we know, everybody that we know to sign that. And then we need to get everybody in our schools, particularly in our maintained nursery schools, to join if they possibly can on that day at Downing Street. We're going to meet at Parliament Square, and then we're going to march down to Downing Street and hand that letter in. Now, we are a small part of the sector. As I've said, our clout isn't great. What we do, I would argue, is really, really important. And if we passionately believe in state education and the public sector educating our children, then this is what we need to fight for. So, you know, the small number that we are must not be allowed to stand alone and become a a smaller number. You know, by the end of this year, we lost 3 nursery schools last year. It's wrong. Tories should be ashamed. We know they're not really. They may give us platitudes, but that's just, you know, they'll thank us when we're doing like putting ourselves in the firing line during the pandemic. They don't really put the money where their mouth is. So this is a call to arms, really, you know, a call to action rather. You know, please get everybody you know to sign that signature, that letter. Share it with as many people as you possibly can in all your districts. If you can possibly come down on the day, come down. We're going to shut early, we hope, on that day, bring all our families with us if we can. And I have a feeling that around the country, people are planning to do the same, even if they're out of London. But certainly if you're in London, please join us. You know, the time is now. There's a possibility that we can shame them enough it's peanuts really that we're asking for in the grand scheme of things. Then give money to, you know, ridiculously rich people already. There's money enough to give. There obviously is money to fund education. We know it. It's a question of choice. So we need to get down there. So please show your solidarity, get involved. Don't give up if you're in Maintain Nursery School. Join the campaign, get active, and let's see what we can do. So thank you so much for letting me speak.
Oh, thank you, Michaela. And absolutely, if you can get to the demonstration in October at Parliament Square, 13th of October, I will be there. I will be rallying people to be there. Even if you're not in a Maintain Nursery School, be there. Rally your primary school. Early years provision, Maintain Nursery schools are so important for the development of young people. You know, this is a time when we've lost Sure Start, early intervention funding has been cut to the bone. We have to absolutely defend Maintain Nursery schools and fight for their fair funding, and see it as part of the broader fight for fair funding in education. You know, we have a £15 billion deficit in education funding currently in terms of COVID recovery. So grotesque that Sir Kevin Collins has even resigned from his position. But thank you so much for that, Michaela. Everybody build the campaign, sign the letter, and join the demonstration. I have one question here. I think I can answer this. I think it's from Amanda. Isn't the introduction of baseline in reception an accountability measure for the whole school, an attempt to undermine the early years curriculum? Yes, it is. It will mean there is more pressure on reception teachers to formalise education and teach literacy and maths instead of learning through play and distract us from the focus of the prime areas. Doesn't this show the DFE's lack of knowledge of early childhood development? Yes, 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 is the answer to that. That is a completely correct position there, Amanda. So that is all we have time for this evening. A huge thank you to our speakers, to Michaela, to Lucy, to Kevin, and to Beatrice. Huge thank you to Sam, our BSL interpreter, and to all the staff who have put on this early years Zoom. But let's remember, we've got to fight and defeat baseline. We've got to campaign for fair funding for Maintain Nursery schools, and we've got to organise to end high stakes protesting broadly in primary schools as well. So thank you very much for this evening. Join more than a score. Come to the demonstration. Sign the letter, and we'll see you in October.